I might not be the only person on the internet who wanted to upload a video like this today of all days, or even earlier for that matter, but on a date as special as this, I am more than happy to oblige regardless. June 15th, 2022. 10 flippin' years ago, as of the day I'm uploading this video, I hope, Disney Channel began airing what many consider to be the greatest and shortest show on its network, or in my case nowadays, network. Gravity Falls. The weirdest, most heartfelt, concise, yeah, when I said shortest, I kinda meant it as a compliment. Well written, and just straight up unique TV show that Disney had at the time, and arguably still does. From the depth and the charm of the characters, the continuity, which can make a whole nother video in itself, the memes, a theme song that is so catchy that I'll happily leave it stuck in my head until death, the big mystery element,
and a lot of humor that goes over kids' heads.
There's just so much to love about this show, and honestly, it really wouldn't surprise me if I'm still rewatching it when I'm standing Ford's age. Whatever that number really is, because...
You know, it was really unclear.
I figured that for its 10th anniversary, I'd rewatch the show again, for like the 5th time, I regret nothing, look back into my history with this series, and try to understand more why I deem it my favorite animated show of all time. After, believe me when I say this, a lot of years worth of on and off deliberation. On top of that, I want to know why so many people still believe it's one of the greatest, if not the greatest, show Disney has ever put out. At least, as far as shows with overarching plots are concerned. I'm not about to put up with these semantics, let's be real. A good show is a good show! Just think about it. 6 years after its finale aired, its subreddit is still consistently active, there's plenty of fan art dished out across the internet, new people are discovering every day, just look up Gravity Falls reaction on YouTube if you don't believe me. And Gravity Falls has a habit of trending on Twitter at least every couple weeks, from what I've observed. To put it more concisely, it just surprises me that it continues to be relevant after all this time, and there's gotta be some reasons behind it that aren't just, you know, the Owl House and Amphibia. As far as the show itself and its history are concerned, I want to know how it started, how it's going after a decade's worth of time, by looking at the stuff that helped it to really stand out, because, if I'm being honest, I'm convinced of one thing.
It's going awesome! Bow, 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 bow.
At least, compared to what Disney Channel had at the time to start. I want to look at the characters, the story elements, the memes, the tone, the show's reputation, and you know what, I'm just gonna flat out say it. This video is basically just gonna be me talking for however long this recording ends up being about how great the show is point by point. If you're down for my antics, then don't click away, and please like and subscribe. Emphasis on subscribe. Here's why I think Gravity Falls will always be great. Oh, and if it somehow isn't obvious enough, I know it's been 10 years since it first aired, but if it's not obvious enough from the amount of reactors on YouTube alone as of late, I'd like to believe that there's more and more people discovering this show every day. And thanks in small part to me, that really has been the case. Though it's probably owed to the fact that I've had too many live streams where I bring it up in casual conversation. As far as how I got into it, well, here's the story, and I'll try to make it brief. I knew about the show since 2012 thanks to some billboard on a Mexican street. Still didn't get into it yet just because I started high school and my parents wouldn't get off my case about good grades, worrying about college, especially since my brother was attending an Ivy League school, so yeah, bar was set pretty damn high for me and I didn't have time for cartoons. Even as a pouty teenager though, I'm glad I didn't care what people thought of me if I watched them. Throughout those times, I saw that WatchMojo put Gravity Falls on their most hated Disney shows list, yeah, you heard that correctly, and I saw them get disliked to all hell, you know, before YouTube removed dislikes for very dumb reasons, I'll admit. That whole ordeal got me wondering if Gravity Falls really is as great as fans berating the comments say it was. And honestly, I didn't think highly of WatchMojo at the time anyways, and I still don't. Cut to the summer before my senior year of high school in 2015, I finally have the time and the memory to start watching this show. So I decided to watch Northwest Mansion Mystery, and honestly, I lucked out on the fact that I chose an episode that didn't spoil much. After that, I decided to start from episode 1, and I basically binge-watched every episode that came on until that point. First episode I ever saw on the day it first aired was the last Mabel corn, meaning I only got to see 6 episodes on their debut. Even with the drudgery of my senior year of high school, I still found time to watch every episode, but I couldn't get as invested as I would have liked. I couldn't get invested into the cryptograms and all those details that frankly, I find really fascinating now that I've solved them. Looking back at it, it was probably for the best because Jesus, some of these took forever to solve without letting the internet give me the answer. With that said, I did enjoy the show, I understood what was going on, and of course I did cry my butt off the first time I saw the finale. And overall, I was glad I could be a small part of something so big. But all things considered, I was sad that I couldn't be a bigger part of a show that really deserved more of my attention at the time. To me, Gravity Falls felt like that show that just went the extra mile. I was so caught up with school, and I wish I could have given this show more of my time, since there was hardly anything like it. Even after that time was done, college was right around the corner, so I couldn't get involved with the Cipher hunt, and I was a stereotypically broke college student, so I couldn't buy Journal 3 as soon as it dropped, and don't even get me started on that limited edition. Honestly, even if money wasn't an issue, I was dumb enough to believe that I wouldn't learn anything that would completely alter my point of view on the shows, since chronologically, the journal is destroyed at a certain point. Cut to several years after I finished college and buying my own copy of the journal, and boy, I was wrong. I honestly thought the journal would be just fun little tidbits about the show, like Dipper's real name and whatnot, but trust me, if you were invested in the show like I did, Journal 3 is totally worth the $20, and it made rewatching the show just as enjoyable as the first time, if not more. Cut to today, and I basically hold my own little humble collection and a lot of love for the characters in this show, now that I actually got to study them as well as, characters. I guess much like Dipper and Mabel, I had a little bit of growing up to do for myself, and I find comfort in the parallel because, damn it, I love these characters so much. But if you're not like me and you're barely delving into the Gravity Falls iceberg, which would kind of make me wonder why you're still watching this video teeming with spoilers, here's a quick synopsis. 12-year-old twins Dipper and Mabel Pines, per order of their parents in an attempt to get them some fresh air, quote-unquote, are now spending their summer with their great Uncle Stan in his cabin/tourist trap in the small town of Gravity Falls, Oregon. And no, even without the fiction, it's not a real town, as much as I hate to admit it. The twins quickly discover that the town holds secrets, monsters, and just flat-out supernatural weirdness, partly due to Dipper's discovery of a journal from an unknown author cataloging most of it. Anomalies including, but not limited to, Avengers Assemble, Boomer stereotypes, No-Face from Spirited Away, and most notably, a triangle-shaped dream demon turned apocalyptic god of nightmares.
I couldn't make this up if I wanted to.
In the process of dealing with these dangers, there is much to be learned for the twins about themselves, but the most notable theme subtly scattered across most episodes, it's coming to terms with the idea of growing up and its ramifications. Most notably through the apparent contrast of Dipper being in a rush to grow up, and Mabel hardly wanting to. But before we get all sentimental, and trust me, I'll try, let's focus on the other good stuff, starting with arguably, and most importantly, as far as the main cast is concerned, namely everyone in this iconic picture, which we never got the story for and it still kind of bothers me, there are three elements that they all share that serve the story and help the characters stand out. Relatability, charm, and self-awareness, specifically of their own pros and cons. And for good measure, every one of these characters have made me laugh on more than one occasion. Some a lot more than others, but comedy isn't everything, even though there is a lot of it. Honestly, it's just a bunch of characters that you would just want to be friends with if they were real people, because if you take out the supernatural craziness of the show, that's really all they are. Just a pair of unnaturally likable twins, a sleazy yet hilarious con man, a man-child with a big heart, and a remarkably serene daughter of a satirically manly lumberjack. Every character had something to offer to the table, or I just ended up liking them too much as characters, and I think many people would agree. I want to look into why that is.
Twins!
Let's start with the most lovably wholesome twins I have ever met. Mason, Dipper, and Mabel Pines. I don't know who raised these kids. No, seriously, they never said their names. But these goofballs, much like the show in question, were an absolute delight from start to finish. Dipper is a curious dork, but never to the point where he looks down on anyone, and honestly, it's in part thanks to this refreshing notion that the audience can genuinely become invested in his ambitions. The show's writing didn't hinge our investment on just the fact that he's the protagonist. At the end of the day, he talks and acts like a kid, and when he behaves cartoonishly, it's meant to be played for laughs. He's got the awkward charm of Eric from That 70s Show, and the kindness and intellect of Chidi from The Good Place. Honestly, I'm glad his writing disregards nerd stereotypes, because even by 2012 standards, that was a tiring, unfunny cliche, and show creator Alex Hirsch was pretty well aware of it, according to DVD commentary. I don't know what it is with Hollywood and big-budget entertainment, but not many actual dorks, if any at all, require a lisp, need to talk with big words, or have a condescending demeanor with strangers. Dipper is smart, but he's also perfectly amiable throughout the show. But he's also prone to behaving nervously and or recklessly. and not necessarily because of his age, his insecurities, or his crush in the form of Wendy. He's smart, but to a fault, but not to the faults that Hollywood loves overusing, such as in, say, Double Dipper. He's planning on getting what he wants, namely, a dance with Wendy. He straight up makes an obscenely large checklist of the process, but eventually, and thanks in part to Mabel and some clones of himself, it's a great story, he realizes the lack of sincerity in the whole ordeal. The boy just reeks of development, and I think one episode that emphasizes what he's grown into most enjoyably, out of all of the examples, is Northwest Mansion Mystery, which takes place about halfway through Season 2. Just look at this one clip, and you'll probably have a grasp on about half the episode.
Guys, in case you've already forgotten, Pacifica Northwest is the worst. And that's not just jealousy talking. I'd say that to her face.
I need your help.
You're the worst. See?
All I'm saying is, if this were Season 1 Dipper, he probably would have stuttered, but nope, he kept his word and he has the guts to hold on to it just as an example. And that moment alone can sum up about half the episode, like I said. The boy is just a living sass machine against the spoiled rich girl that is Pacifica, and the fact that it stems from all the times she's hurt his sister just conveys his character and his love for Mabel in such a compelling fashion that's always fun to watch. The confidence this boy radiates in this episode alone is unlike anything seen before in the show up until that point. I'd elaborate more, but I think it's clear enough that we can pin this on his character development. Overall, Dipper uses his brain a lot more than his heart, but when his heart begets his brain or vice versa, he's just a force to be reckoned with, socially speaking. Which brings us to... where do I begin with this absolute cinnamon roll of a human being? Mabel is just joy incarnate, and despite how constantly rambunctious she was throughout most of the show, and a little disgusting, not once did my jaded self ever say,
Alright, I get it!
It's like the writers knew at a certain point that all that energy in her can become exhausting or overwhelming for the audience, and trust me, when you're voiced by Kristen Shaw, it's practically in full force. She's energetic, she's optimistic, she's a lot smarter than she lets on, even if her common knowledge slips a little.
Since when are we 13? Is this a leap year?
She makes puns and doesn't make it her whole personality, but she can be naive and romantically desperate. Most notably though, she's happy, and she wants everyone she cares about to be happy. Think about it. She stood up against Pacifica and competed against her for Candy and Grenda, even though she literally just met them. There's a reason she was genuinely concerned with being a good matchmaker in that one episode. Even if said episode had an ethically questionable conclusion, but at least the writers were aware, and Journal 3 put my conscience at ease. And that's really what her character boils down to. She's basically an embodiment of happiness, and she wants to make sure others can be happy. Be it her family, her friends, pretentious jerks, customers and employees, or even a scary-looking stranger that happens to be nearby. While Dipper tends to listen to his head, Mabel tends to listen to her heart. While it's made clear enough throughout the entire show that Dipper using his head can backfire, it's made abundantly clear through her, and some cases Stan, that heart without head, so to speak, can be just as detrimental as head without heart. The show conveys that the bond between Dipper and Mabel is synergistic and complementary to their own characters, all while showing us a dark parallel of them through Stan and Ford's relationship. Thanks to Mabel's joy and encouragement, Dipper isn't a jaded smartass, and thanks to Dipper's caution and intellect, Mabel's energy doesn't turn into constant and consequential recklessness. And I already know what some people might say in the comments, particularly a demographic that, frankly, I'm ashamed to have ever agreed with. Yeah, for several years, I used to be on the whole Mabel-hating bandwagon craze. I was all, oh my gosh, she's selfish, Dipper always sacrifices for her, she learns nothing, the unicorn was right. Even though the unicorn straight up got outed as a fraud, and it's not like she didn't self-reflect on what the horned horse said, and okay, you know what? Screw it. I might get too sidetracked and off topic with what I'm about to say, but damn it, I have a lot of pent-up frustrations with the amount of crap Mabel gets. After all these years, I can say most, if not all of it, makes no sense whatsoever. Seriously, I can't believe there was ever a time when I agreed with most of what has been said. Nowadays, I can't even look at that sort of stuff without scoffing at it. I'll try not to get into all the instances as to why I strongly disagree, because ultimately that's not what this video is about, but I do want to say a few things regarding some of the apparent examples of Mabel's selfishness. As far as I can tell, the Time Traveler's Pig and the Deep End make for some of the circumstances that some people claim the writing favors Mabel unjustifiably. As far as the time traveling ordeal is concerned, I don't know how people still have the gall to say otherwise, but it was not a sacrifice for Dipper, let alone a sign of how the writing favors what Mabel wanted. What Dipper wanted came at Mabel's expense in the first place. She won her pig Waddles at the fair without having to steal a time machine. Meanwhile, Dipper, his word, not mine, couldn't stop Wendy from going out with Robbie without rewinding time over and over again and eventually costing Mabel her pig. And in every one of those resetted timelines, Mabel got to bond with her newly won pig at the fair in one way or another. Be it photo booths, Ferris wheels, or sharing a pepperoni pizza, which is pretty messed up if you think about it too long. If anyone was being selfish here, which I'm not saying he was, it was Dipper. Mabel told him she was tagging along for his time travel just to relive winning Waddles and, by extension, spend more time with him at the fair. She was just there to have fun without screwing up the past, while Dipper was there to undo, honestly, a pretty relatable mistake. One slip up with a baseball, and seriously, what the heck was in those baseballs? Cost him gaining favor with his crush, not that he had much hope with a girl, literally twice his height and noticeably older than him, but that's beyond the point. And when the dust was settled, Dipper stopped Robbie from dating Wendy with Mabel's help in one timeline. As a result, Mabel was too late to win Waddles before, coincidentally, her bitter rival Pacifica. After a tussle involving even more time travel, they both end up in a timeline they left. Mabel tells Dipper that Waddles was her soulmate. He tells her she said that about a yarn ball once, and challenged her to think if she really wanted Wendy to end up with Robbie. Even if Mabel agreed, which she would if she weren't caught up in the Waddles ordeal, as proven in the beginning of the episode, who Wendy decides to go out with is hardly any of Dipper's business if it's not him. I think the worst part about all this is that I've seen people try to pass this off as if Dipper's being absolutely right, presumably just because he's the smart one of the two. I've seen people act so callously towards Mabel for this in particular. If anything, the people agreeing with Dipper here should have caught on to a few things that Dipper should have as well, especially for a show that loves to reward observation. Granted, calling your pet pig your soulmate is a hell of an overstatement, but she did spend a lot of resetted timelines with the pig. Timelines that Dipper created. For someone who said he was genuinely worried about paradoxes, he really didn't take Mabel's company into account. Point is that Waddles meant a lot more to Mabel than a yarn ball ever could, and it was his fault. Honestly, it's really frustrating that Dipper thought Mabel held no genuine affection for Waddles whatsoever, all things considered. Seriously, you tried spending one day with a cute animal, and I dare you not to get attached. Unless you're too much of a hard ass, which kind of plays back to the deduction that Dipper would be pretty stuck up without Mabel. Wow, this writing is great, but we knew that already. According to him, there was no timeline where he could get what he wanted without screwing her over, so ultimately it came down to Dipper doing the right thing, even if he didn't do it out of love for his sister, which he did do, fortunately. As for the deep end, well, it doesn't boil down to an obvious enough right or wrong. Both twins have something they want to accomplish, so if it had to come down to one or the other, the best way to decide who deserved what they wanted more was to look at their motivations and the consequences. To give a quick synopsis, Mabel befriends a boy at the public pool who is secretly a merman stranded in said pool, trying to find a way back to his family in the ocean. Meanwhile, Dipper got a job there as an assistant lifeguard, though he only took it as an excuse to spend more time with Wendy. Eventually, it leads up to Mabel needing the pool supplies to bust Mermando out, at the cost of Dipper's job. However, and to be fair, Dipper didn't really care about the job in the first place. Boy makes it abundantly clear that the end goal of his assistant lifeguard gig is to grow closer with Wendy, even if his romantic chances are dim, but again, that's besides the point. If things had gone Dipper's way, Mermando still would have stayed separated from his family, but Dipper would have kept his job. That he would have quit on the same day as soon as he heard Wendy got fired. People like to pretend Mabel is a selfish one this time because Mermando was just a romantic interest for her, of which she has too many to count, but for once, she saw more than just romance with an unrelated male friend and just wanted to get him back home, even if it meant never seeing him again, which actually ended up happening. Some people like to think that Mabel was just in it for the romance, but she proved that she really cared for Mermando as a person. Meanwhile, Dipper's only motivation was hanging out with Wendy. If we're going to talk about who was in the wrong here, if anyone at all, we can judge the outcome of the episode on the twins' motivations and the consequences. Don't act like Dipper really cared about the job itself. All he ever did at the job was mess around with Wendy, and all his boss practically ever did was frighten him through his unstable demeanor. Honestly, I would go on and on about all the arguments against Mabel, and now that I got some of it off my chest, I really do want to, but like I said, this is not what this video is about. At least not this one. I don't know, I kind of want to delve into the rest of the accusations another time. Not that I trust that they're compelling, at least not anymore. Like I said, for many years after the show's ending, I used to believe that Mabel was the worst like some people say. TLDR, Mabel haters, get a clue and lighten up. Seriously, it's been 6 years. I've had plenty of time to rewatch and think it all through, and I know that it was never that simple. I don't want to get too sidetracked, so I digress. Let's focus on the overwhelming amount of positive areas of Dipper and Mabel's dynamic instead. You know, like I was meant to. Of all the twins, and by extension sibling relationships that are portrayed in movies and TV, and in general, not to point too many fingers, I have never seen a dynamic more charming, yet genuinely plausible as the one between Dipper and Mabel. For once in a blue moon, an animated TV show shows a pair of kid siblings who aren't constantly bickering, holding grudges, giving the impression that they hate each other, aren't indifferent to each other's lives, or worst of all, having parents who pretend like all that terrible behavior is normal. Sure, there were episodes where the twins genuinely conflicted with each other, but most, if not all the time, and at the end of the day, they never clung to petty rivalries, and they learned why they turned on each other in the first place. By extension, they eventually find compassion and forgiveness. Take the episode Little Dipper, for example. Mabel has a sudden change of behavior and begins teasing Dipper, well, a lot more oddly than usual, over the fact that she's taller than him now. By 1 millimeter, mind you. Dipper takes the teasing to heart, and he uses a journal to find crystals that help him grow enough to make up the difference. Long story short, Mabel doubles down on the teasing by saying she'll be taller in the end, and the rivalry results in them both getting shrunk down and kidnapped by the family enemy Gideon. Cut to a few minutes later, Dipper learns that Mabel's teasing was her projecting the fact that she won at a game of height, unlike every other game they play, such as chess in the beginning of the episode. She let the sense of victory go to her head since she felt like she never had it before, as far as competing with her brother is concerned. Meanwhile, Dipper let the insecurity of 1 millimeter go to his head because he hardly felt insecure about anything around just Mabel specifically. Whenever Mabel teased him in the past, he knows it's never malicious and takes it lightly, but this time it felt different for him. He was a sore loser and she was a sore winner, but it was all because neither of them were used to that kind of experience between each other, and for kids at that age, I totally get it. That's where the relatability comes in, just to name one example. And apparently all of this is inspired by a real-world experience of show creator Alex Hirsch and his own twin sister, according to the creator commentary on the DVD. Honestly, I know a good chunk of the characters in the show's circumstances are loosely inspired on his friends and family, and his childhood respectively, but the fact that he and his team of writers, one of which went to direct an Oscar-nominated film, mind you, managed to incorporate the creator's real-world experience just goes to show that these writers had their work cut out for them, and it damn well paid off. Honestly, after hours of listening to commentary, special features on the DVD, and just plain old researching, I'd kind of feel dickish if I didn't take their word that this show's writing was ridiculously taxing, even if that goes for most good shows nowadays. I guess the point I'm trying to get across is, Alex, Michael, Shion, anyone else in that writing room whose name I can't remember as I'm typing the script, you all have my absolute respect for such dedication. Speaking of dedication, though, I'm gonna just say this now. I don't care how long or how iconic Mr. Krabs or Scrooge McDuck are. When it comes to notoriously greedy old dudes in animation, they cannot hold a candle to Stan Pines. He can be snarky and somewhat of a prankster, but one thing he makes abundantly clear, once the audience learns everything about him, if you've seen the show, you probably know what episodes I'm talking about, he is dedicated as hell for his family. At a glance, he's a greedy conman with more quips than an MCU protagonist, but that notorious greed and charisma is just the surface. Despite all the shortcomings he had compared to his abnormally smart brother throughout their childhoods, they got along synergistically, much like Dipper and Mabel. One had a bigger brain, and the other had a bigger heart, and when the bond was threatened by Ford's collegiate opportunities, things took a turn for the worst. Stan sabotaged a science project that would have gotten Ford accepted into a big-name college on the other side of the country, resulting in this hard-ass of a father kicking him out of his home for ruining the family's chances of big money, which is pretty messed up the more I think about it. Seriously, everyone talks about how Preston Northwest is the worst dad in the show, which I don't disagree with, but I think Philbrick Pines deserves some credit. Guy disowned his kid for costing him money that didn't exist yet, and wouldn't legally belong to either of them anyways. When it came down to it, Ford didn't stand up for Stan in the altercation, and honestly, I almost couldn't blame him. As a result, Stan was around 18 on his own, with nothing but a car to his name and not even a high school diploma by the looks of it. One mistake was all it took for him to lose everything he really cared about, which really was just his brother. Cut to about 10 years later, he's been scraping by and stuck his nose with too many of the wrong crowds, if you know what I mean. And not once did the guy land anything resembling a stable income. Stan thought of himself as whose name was synonymous with mistakes. To add insult to injury, he really had no one to turn to, no matter how dire things got. Guy was hinging on his business schemes and lottery tickets to make ends meet for himself, until one day, Ford sent him a postcard needing his help. After a decade of not having so much as a shred of familial contact, Stan's only family points a crossbow at him out of paranoia and tells him to take one of 3 journals and never see him again, as if that practically wasn't the case already. The man had absolutely no one or nothing to love for about a decade, and when he thought a chance for reconciliation finally came, his family just pushed him away again, or what was left of it. Even though the reasons for it weren't as callous this time, Stan doesn't take it well, and to put it briefly, the ensuing argument causes Stan to accidentally banish Ford to another dimension, and unless he could find journals 1 and 2 without any leads to boot, there was no hope of him seeing another person sharing the Pine's name again, as far as he knew. And that was the case for about 30 years. Since Ford was a recluse for most of his time as a scientist, the townsfolk of Gravity Falls mistook Stan for his twin, and he takes advantage of the situation in hopes of being able to pay the bills at the very least. Wouldn't you know it, life throws him a bone, albeit by unethical means, but this man was hell-bent on making up for it. Thanks to Ford's vague but respectable reputation, Stan was able to turn his house into a profiteering tourist trap, and when the townsfolk in question are notoriously gullible, you could say the man struck gold. But despite the levity of having a stable income for once, and considering the jaded survival instinct he probably built over the years, his heart was still intact. Even though he had no way of knowing if Ford was still alive, even if he could finally make ends meet, even if he had to give up every blessing this town threw at him, be it the home or the livelihood, Stan Pine still basically told himself, it's worth a damn shot. Or at the very least, he owed Ford that shot. For once he had a mistake he believed he could fix by just trying. From that point onward, he spent 30 years making ends meet, including paying his brother's mortgage, mind you, studying advanced sciences such as physics and engineering, which for a C student is pretty damn impressive if not dedicated, and searching for the journals. He could have lived the rest of his life as an imposter and no one would have questioned it, but despite 10 years of looking out for no one but himself, he still loved his brother, and when he really was your only friend growing up, he really couldn't help but cherish him, even if they were on rocky terms, to put it lightly. As if his dedication wasn't strong enough, the journals himself told him that trying to bring him back was risky. Seriously, it's like the universe itself was telling Stan that none of what he was doing would be worth it, but he still pushed on and succeeded. He is a man of focus, commitment, and sheer will. I guess those dumb Vin Diesel memes were kinda onto something. Even before the chance to bring Ford back finally arose, Stan had his chance to grow with family again in the form of Dipper and Mabel, albeit it was owed to the fact that their parents thought he was Ford, much like everyone else. The 3 of them had their ups and downs, but as the show progresses, you could just tell that the bond between Stan and the kids really grew into something remarkably wholesome. At the start of the summer, you could tell Stan was indifferent towards the kids, but as the show goes on, you could tell he yearned to bond with family through the twins, because he truly wants to love what family he has, and for all he knew, he might not get the chance with his own twin ever again. Seeing Stan's connection is just another gratifying part of witnessing character development. From the pilot, you could tell he was practically indifferent, but a few key moments sprinkled throughout the series show that they definitely meant a lot to Stan than they did before. Be it saving Waddles for Mabel, encouraging her before her mini-golf match with a sticker, ignoring road loss to help Dipper expose his crush's lying boyfriend, fighting zombies, performing karaoke no matter how horrible his singing voice is, you name it. And lastly, as if all that depth and character development wasn't good enough, which it totally was, this guy's just a walking quote machine. Compared to the Pines family, Soos and Wendy are characters that aren't as thoroughly complex as the former, and the amount of screen time reflects that. However, they did receive episodes that focused on them, or episodes revolving around their connections with the Pines. And like I said, relatability, charm, and self-awareness, they're all there. Soos is a kind-hearted, slightly airheaded, and concerningly gluttonous handyman at the Mystery Shack who is playfully confident. He looks up to Stan as a father figure as a result of him unintentionally getting hired as a handyman around 10 years before the events of the show, where he learned that his father had abandoned him on the day of his birth. You know what? I can't even finish this damn synopsis. It's too freaking sad. Over time, he grows to care for Dipper and Mabel, almost like a lovable big brother to them. He drives them where they need to be, he supports Dipper in his paranormal paranoia when no one else would or cared. He plays along with Mabel's shenanigans, and he just tends to have fun right along with the twins whenever he's not working. even if his airheadedness gets the better of him sometimes, like in The Land Before Swine. I'm glad there was an episode that addresses it and Soos acknowledges his shortcomings. Just characters going out of the way to acknowledge their problems is more than enough to imply that they try to better themselves. Or at the very least, it's a sign of character development, which does go into full force for Soos when his dedicated episodes come, and you could argue the same for Wendy when her time to shine came. Honestly, when you first get to know her in The Inconveniencing, she just seems rebellious, daring, and pretty appealing for the audience, and more so for Dipper. But that aside, her behavior was simply that of a teenager because, well, let's just say she had a role to play. The aloof but approachable teenager and Dipper's romantic interest. Once we get to Season 2 though, whoop boy! Turns out having a dad with a title overly manly is really worthwhile in extreme situations. Situations like dealing with a monster that can turn into anything it sees, or, you know, surviving the frickin' apocalypse. And don't misunderstand, she's not the embodiment of perfection, and no character should be, otherwise you'll get another Mary Sue, like Rey from Star Wars. Despite Wendy's daring prowess and charm, there's one line in Season 2 that really drives her character home, and exemplifies her relatability and self-awareness.
Okay, I'm not actually laid back. I'm stressed like 24/7. Have you met my family?
Even with all the admirable qualities she formed over the years, they kinda came at a price. 3 younger brothers and an overly manly dad who made her skip out on Christmas for apocalypse training really did a number on her. And it seems like her friends were hardly any different. They all look up to her, and she said it herself that they're, and I quote, pretty intense. Maybe that's why she gets along with Dipper so well, considering his soft demeanor, to put it nicely. Maybe she sees him as a sincere levity. But what do I know? I'm just here to analyze and admire. Honestly, there are so many characters that are remembered for unique reasons that I'd love to cover, but for conciseness sake, I think it's best that I focus on the characters that matter most. On that topic though, you didn't think I'd make a video praising everything I love about this show without taking this guy into account, did you? Yep. Everyone's favorite, diabolical, charismatic, traumatizing, manipulative, masochistic... Wait, what?
Woo! Woo! Pain is hilarious!
William Benjamin Nah, just kidding. His name is really just Bill. Bill Cipher has gone down as one of the best villains Disney has had to offer in recent years, and arguably in its entire history. Even though he only had about 7 episodes worth of screen time, out of 40 mind you, he definitely left a lasting impact in the Disney pantheon. How is it that a creature with such a simple design manages to be so hilarious yet so terrifying? He's insane, and he's pretty damn well aware of it. His motivations might not be the most complex compared to other villains, but he absolutely makes up for it with simply the humor and the stakes he creates. It's like Heath Ledger's Joker. His origins and hence his motivations might be a little too vague, but that's part of the appeal as a villain. Unlike the Joker though, Bill isn't a self-proclaimed agent of chaos. He is the chaos. Think of other iconic Disney villains like Maleficent or Cruella de Vil, while ignoring their unnecessary cash grab spin-offs. She cursed the baby for not being invited to a party, and she wanted to butcher puppies to make a friggin' coat. He screwed with people, he wanted to cause an apocalypse, and got nothing but kicks out of it. As far as villains like these are concerned, obviously their motivations are petty as all hell, but the passion these villains portray, sometimes in conjunction with imagery like Maleficent's dragon, help the audience to remember them pretty well. And trust me, Bill Cipher is no slouch when it comes to imagery. However, rather than imposing like the dragon, his imagery is more so horrifying. Not every bad guy needs to be some sort of killmonger with a tragic backstory and a genuinely vengeful drive. Some of them just need to entertain, create stakes, and in this particular instance, make you realize that Disney media can be genuinely terrifying. And Bill Cipher takes all of those attributes to a completely new level. But if the Disney comparison's a little too on the nose, then think of why the Terminators makes for such memorable villains, at least in the good ones. All they had to do was kill one person after being sent back in time. It's not necessarily the resilience that helps an audience remember them out of fear, it's the fact that they genuinely pose a genuine threat throughout the story through their murderous prowess or the fact that they were just incredibly hard to kill. While Bill may have made his weaknesses apparent in some circumstances, it wasn't until his plans to create the apocalypse finally came to fruition that he genuinely fulfilled the said role of a threat. One physical form later, and suddenly he has all the power in the world. Power that could kill a god of time in the blink of an eye. He's cunning, he's chaotic, and in the spirit of the show's setting and tone, he is by all means what he wanted to spread across the world. weird. Speaking of weird, though, when your show's slogan is just west of weird, there's one word to describe this show's overall tone. Silly. And trust me, I mean that as the best of compliments. Gravity Falls as a show owes half of its reputation for its comedy and the remarkable ways it circumvents censoring, but there's even more to it than that, which I think is worth appreciating. Nearly every moment that didn't have to be serious was always tagged along by a harmless joke or a gag that could genuinely and harmlessly make you laugh. And you can tell the writers took pride in the effort that went into the silliness of these jokes. They always wanted to keep the audiences amused whenever they got the chance. Be it the dumb infomercials, Mabel's habits, Stan's quips, whatever the Pines were watching on TV. It wasn't just the townsfolk or the monsters that were meant to be weird, but pretty much everything the audience could see when the time was right. There's even a whole episode that I think exemplifies this tone and what it represents, and it's beautifully done through a character arc for Mabel. If you've seen the show, which you totally should have if you're this far into the video, you know exactly what I'm talking about. One of my favorites, if not the favorite episode from Season 1, Irrational Treasure. Not only am I a sucker for puzzles and conspiracies, but the message of the episode is just delightful. The episode starts with Mabel acting in her usual rambunctious manner, and it continues on as there is a pioneer festival in town, celebrating its founding. As it turns out, local spoiled rich girl and Mabel's rival Pacifica is a descendant of the town founder, and the rich girl seizes the opportunity to humiliate Mabel, resulting in Mabel questioning her playfulness and even her iconic sweaters, leading to Dipper wanting to put the rich girl in her place, and thanks to the journal, he can. According to the journal, Pacifica's ancestor might be a fraud, so Dipper investigates out of curiosity and spite, while Mabel tags along to prove herself that she's not all fun and game. It turns out Mabel's silliness, in the forms of making paper hats, looking at a painting upside down, and letting a statue pick her nose, was able to solve all of the puzzles that no one else could in over a century, leading to the confirmation of the journal's theory. Ultimately, Mabel learns that there's no shame in being silly, and she had nothing to prove to herself, let alone Pacifica. I said that the charm of these characters are part of what won me and many people over, and that's what Mabel said she thought she was when being questioned about herself. She just wants to make people smile, much like what the show does half the time. Calling something weird can be subjective, and in that spirit, I don't see why Mabel's silliness can't fall under that. And again, believe me when I say, I mean that as a genuine compliment. Whenever the show didn't have to be serious, not to say that I don't genuinely respect it for that as well, this is what Gravity Falls and arguably all of its characters were at its core. It was a world that was silly, that could be serious, as proven by the tone and the insurmountable depth of its characters, respectively. And it never tried to confuse its audience with which is which. As far as the former is concerned, Mabel personified it best. Maybe Alex Hirsch was onto something when he referred to Mabel as the heart and soul of Gravity Falls that one time at Comic-Con. As far as silliness and seriousness are concerned with this show, it's perfectly balanced, as all things should be. With a show as masterful as this one said and done, one can't help but wonder what it's become this past decade, in addition to being one of the most memorable and compelling TV shows in Disney's history. I think its reputation is clear enough from the tone, silly and serious, and that tone is truly reflected into everything that formed a part of the show. You could tell the people working on the show just wanted to have a genuine fun, while also creating a story that many people would remember for years to come. I think it's clear enough that a show like this wasn't meant for just kids and young teenagers, but when you take the fact that they're the main demographic into account, anyone, be it kid or adult, can self-reflect on the strongest message it had to offer, coming to terms with the idea of growing up and what has to be done for such an arduous and inevitable process. It can be scary to so much as to think about the fact that you can't be a kid forever, and not nearly every moment is striving to be a happy one anymore, to the point where you recklessly charge at it like Dipper, or try to avoid it altogether like Mabel. But as long as you have support from people who truly care about you, going through it will be more fulfilling than either of those two approaches ever could be. More specifically, the support from your loved ones, if nothing more, will help remind you of who you are as a kid and who you can be as an adult, without sacrificing what truly helped define you, be it what goes on in your head or what goes on in your heart. It is a perfect balance for a pair of twins that anyone can grasp and appreciate, not just other twins. The characters, the fun, the stakes, the style, and lastly, the ideas that they all represent and portray to audiences, be it the ideas of the themes and, by extension, the ideas that stem from the minds behind it all. That is why Gravity Falls will stay remembered and appreciated for many more years to come. That is why Gravity Falls will always be great.